Now, the next thing that you're going to need to do in your file, I'm going to hold down space bar. Let's go ahead and select this rectangle, and I'm going to just press the delete key to delete it. So I just pressed the V to grab my selection tool, and then I selected that object and I pressed the delete key. I no longer need the artboards panel, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. The next thing that we're going to want to make sure that we have open is our layers panel. I'm going to make a quick change so that you can see the artboards a little bit easier. I'm going to go up here to the top right and select panel options and change my row size to 60 pixels. This may not be necessary for you on your personal computer, but it might be nice to see in this video just to kind of make this a little bit easier to see on the screen. The next thing that we're going to want to do is start creating some tracing layers. And we're going to need a pixel-based file for this. So I have a JPEG inside of Blackboard. You can download trace.2 JPEG. I think it's, or my desktop is trace3. I renamed it. You can use any image that you want for this. It's fine. But I have one supplied here. If you want to use that one, that's good too. There's a couple of different ways that we can bring in this pixel-based layer into our vector-based program for the purposes of tracing. And that first one is to use file place. And this is kind of the preferred way of doing it. And if I select trace 3, we have a few options here that we need to take note of. The first one is that we're going to link this file. It will not be embedded in the AI file. We're going to take a look at this in a minute about how linking files work, but know that the option for linking or embedding the file with the AI file is right here. We also have the option to create a template layer, which we're going to want to check. If for any reason we were importing a document that had multiple pages or some other options, we would want to check show or import options, but there frankly isn't anything that we need to change with the simple one JPEG file, so we're going to leave that unchecked. And I'll go ahead and hit place, and it will automatically, you'll notice here in our layers panel, it will automatically create a template layer. I know that it's a template layer not only because it says template, but also because it has this rectangle instead of the eyeball. That rectangle obviously will change the visibility just like the eyeball would. So from here, we're going to need to unlock our layer because obviously I'm going to hold down the Alt key once again and mouse wheel out a few steps. This is probably a little bit too big. We're going to need to get it down to size so that we can work with it on our artboard. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock it, grab my V tool, select the object. And one thing that you will never ever want to do with any pixel layer ever is change the proportions. That is to say that the proportion, whatever this value, the width is to the height, always should stay the same. Meaning that if I change this, notice that I have changed the width, but not the height, and we have distorted our image quite a bit. You never ever want to do this with pixel-based layers. In general, is a bad idea. So inside of Illustrator, and I'm just going to hit Control Z or Command Z to undo that as needed. So what you need to do inside of Illustrator is go ahead and hold down the Shift key while resizing, and that will constrain the proportions. It will not allow me to distort the image in any way. So I'm going to go ahead and resize and reposition as necessary using my V tool. If you need to hold down your space bar, bring up that hand tool, or zoom in and out with the mouse wheel and the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, please do so. And I'll go ahead and position that here. Again, we're going to trace on top of this object. So what I really want to do is kind of position it in a way that maximizes my whatever artboard size there, like that. That looks pretty good, although it's going to kind of depend on whatever object you have. All right, so I'm going to show you another way of bringing in a tracing layer. If for any reason you have a pixel-based layer already on your document, you can do it this way too. I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new layer, which I can do by at the bottom of my layers planner, there's that little plus icon, and I'm going to create a new layer. All right, with that new layer active, I'm just simply going to drag and drop that layer into my Illustrator document. Now this kind of comes with a disadvantage of it doesn't automatically create that tracing layer or give me any options really. So I'm going to have to hold down Alt at this time, and we're going to have to create that tracing layer manually. And just like before, I'm going to hold down my Shift key using my V tool, and I'm simply going to resize that using my Alt and mouse wheel as necessary, and repositioning like that. Should be good. All right, once I have it into position, I'm going to go ahead and select the options for layer 3, which I can do by accessing. If I double click the layer name, I can edit the name of the layer. That's not what I want. I want to actually access the layer properties, which I can do by double clicking somewhere between the layer name and what we call the meatball right here. And if I do that, I will access the layer options. So inside of these layer options, again, I could change the layer name just as I could before. We can also change the display color, which is going to be the display color for any object selected. It doesn't actually change the artwork in any way, but keep in mind that this is here because sometimes you might be working with an orange illustration and your selections are going to look orange as well. And sometimes it's helpful to kind of be able to change these colors to something a little bit more useful. I'm going to go ahead and leave this at green for now. That's working for me. We also have options here to check the template layer. And notice that what it does is that one, it's going to automatically lock and change some of these options for us. It's also going to dim the image. So keep in mind that this dim image option is here. If for some reason you don't like it dimming your artwork as it did on our first artboard, we can always change this later on. I think it's rather useful for kind of keeping it separate between the thing that you're tracing on top and the thing beneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the default value of 50%, but just keep in mind that your whatever your preference is to change that as needed. Once I do that, I'll click OK. And now we can see here that it has created a template layer. We know it's a template layer because it has a rectangle here instead of the eyeball. And if I was going to trace on this layer, as we will in the next exercise, I would simply select the layer above it and begin tracing like so. All right, this is not, I would not actually trace like this, but anyway, you guys get the idea. The nice thing about tracing layers is that it's going to give us several advantages. One, Illustrator knows that it's not going to, that it's intended to be a tracing layer. So it's not going to ever print that layer. So if we were to, file print this, it would not print any of the tracing layers. If we were to export this into a JPEG, it's not going to export any of these tracing layers. So it knows that these layers are there for the purpose of tracing and will act intuitively based on that. Now, one thing that we need to take pretty good note of is the fact that we have linked both of these images to the image on my case in my desktop. Now, if I use, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and file save my document, and I'm going to save it onto my desktop, which is the same location as my JPEG file. And I'm going to go ahead and click save. The default options are fine here. What ends up happening is that this is, as long as these two files remain in the same folder together, these links will never break. But if I do anything like move, let's create a new folder. I'm just gonna name it 1, 2, 3, 4, why not? And I move this JPEG file in there and I go back to Illustrator. Notice that it says some files are missing or modified in the links panel. There is a links panel, we'll look at that in just a second. Would you like to update them now? So I'm gonna go ahead and click yes. And it's going to ask me, because what has happened is it is expecting that JPEG to be sitting next to it and it no longer knows the location of that. So what I need to do is I need to click replace. I'll go ahead and go into the folder that I moved it into and I'll simply reselect that image and select replace. Now the second image also has its link broken as well. I'm a little surprised. Sometimes it's a little bit more intuitive about that. It will kind of fix all links for you, but in this case it doesn't appear to do that. And there we go, we fixed that issue. So if I go to my window and then links panel, we can see here that the two links that I have created in these two tracing layers are looking fine. We have options here to edit, replace, or fix anything inside of here, so just keep that in mind inside of your links panel. If you're having trouble relinking your layers, there are some options in here for. Now, it is best practice to link your files rather than embedding them, so please do not embed your files, especially when you're going to have 9 tracing layers inside of here. If you were just having a single tracing layer inside of this document, that might be okay. However, this will start to really slow down Illustrator once it starts to embed quite a few images. So it's really just best practice not to do this. Also, you're going to want to keep your Illustrator file and your JPEG within the same folder. And that way, whenever you want to move, so all of your images and your Illustrator file should all be in the same folder. I'm going to go ahead and make that change now. I'll go ahead and save. I'll go ahead and close this document and click yes to save. Let's go ahead and drag our Illustrator file into the folder that we created. Might be a good idea to rename this. Let's call it assignment 1. And I'll go ahead and double click and edit my Illustrator file. It may come up and say that my links are not broken. Okay, there we go. It found it again. If it can find it again, it will, but more often than not, it can't find it. And now, whenever I want to move or change anything, I move this entire folder around and I'll never have to worry about those links. If you really want to stay organized, you could have like subfolders inside of here. Just keep in mind that any renaming of this file will break those links, and you'll just simply have to relink those files once inside of Illustrator. So if I do that now, if I go ahead and change the name to Trace4, I go back to Illustrator, again, we have the same problem. And I'm just going to, let's see, and this time I'm going to click Apply to All, and we're going to replace that. And I'll go back to my documents. Where is assignment 1, Trace4, and click Replace. There we go. Now we have fixed our links in our document. Also, as you turn in this document, you'll need to turn in both of these files. So keep that in mind as you turn in your work and you have tracing layers. So keep in mind that we need to see these tracing layers. All right, that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for watching.